You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 52 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. And you know what? Let's just get right into it. Utah Thunder, Game 6. Both teams came out hesitant, and I think that was to be expected after such an emotional victory for Oklahoma, and also such a backbreaking or heartbreaking loss for the Jazz. But to start off, this was absolutely a throwback to some of those old 80s and 90s games, and it was a 22-18 score at the end of the first quarter. Oklahoma was able to muster a bit of a run towards the end of the quarter, but Utah came fighting back, and the fact that they were only down by 4, they had to be ecstatic with that because they played really bad, especially on the offensive end. Throughout this series, we've gotten used to seeing them really execute the ball and move the ball well, but that wasn't the case in the first quarter. They were still shell-shocked by what happened in the second half of Game 5. And Oklahoma wasn't that much better, but their defense was sound, their rotations was good. But Utah did return the favor to Oklahoma defensively in the second quarter. And the Thunder didn't have a basket in the first 5 minutes of the second quarter. The Thunder did respond to establish a 35-24 lead. Westbrook had a pretty nice dunk on the fast break. And this contest seemed destined to be a low-scoring and physical game. With the amount of energy that both teams were putting in defensively, the question was who was going to give in first. And Mark Jones, the commentator for ESPN, likened it to a boxing match, and he wasn't wrong. Utah had tied it at 39 after back-to-back threes from Ingles, which was massive, and we saw a tired game heading into the third quarter. In the third quarter, we saw the Jazz surge ahead with strong play from Mitchell and Favors, and they established a 10-point lead. Oklahoma was able to stay within striking distance, but they were powerless in slowing down Mitchell, who was having the game of his life and absolutely tearing up the Thunder throughout the quarter. This was incredibly impressive when you consider he was doing this mainly against Paul George, who was considered one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. I would have liked to have seen Westbrook accept the challenge of guarding Mitchell, but we didn't really see that. And speaking of challenges and not accepting him, Paul George had his worst game as a pro. And with Carmelo already struggling, all the offensive responsibilities fell on Westbrook. He did a great job of keeping the Thunder competitive, but with Mitchell rolling and Utah's role players contributing, it was just, honestly, it's just too much to ask anybody to overcome that. Now, down the stretch, Grant hit a 3 and then blocked a shot that led to a 3-point play for Westbrook on the break, and the lead was suddenly cut to 5. The pressure was at its highest when Felton hit another huge 3 in the corner to make it a 4-point game. Westbrook then cut it to 1, and Favors hit a jumper, and Oklahoma started jacking desperation threes. They missed a bunch of them, but they kept getting the offensive boards. And of course, that led to one of the most incredible non-calls in the history of the NBA, and I'm not overselling that. And if it sounds like I'm a little bit flat, it's because I'm frustrated, man. I am so frustrated, and full disclosure, I am not a Thunder fan. I actually like the Jazz. If the truth be told, I like the style that Utah plays a lot more than the style that Oklahoma plays. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's stick with this call, and I'm going to do my best to not curse. Okay? If I curse, I'm going to have to beep it out because we're the second ranked podcast on iTunes and the Sports and Rec, so I have to be on my best behavior. But that no call ended up finishing the Thunder's season. And I know the Thunder had multiple shots on that possession, but they earned those shots, okay, via offensive rebounds. They weren't just gifted those shots. It's not like they missed a shot and then, they were tackling players and the ball would trickle out of bounds and the refs were swallowing their whistles. No, they were going after, they were crashing the board. Steven Adams was incredible. They were tapping it. They were doing whatever. Those were desperation situations. And I know, I mentioned this a second ago, Paul George shot horribly in that game. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter that he shot terribly. The fact of the matter is, at the end of the game, it was a 3-point difference. Paul George went up for a 3. He was hit. Everybody watching that game, everyone in the arena, everybody watching it on TV, watching it on the internet, watching it around the world, saw that was a foul. Hell, even Snyder, the head coach of the Utah Jazz, when Gobert hit him, he put his head in his hands out of frustration because he was expecting a foul to be called and Paul George to go to the foul line. And for them to not make that call, it's just unbelievable. I can't put it into words because the game gets sold short once again. Because, as I said, if you've got the opposing head coach who will normally, you're talking about very select plays where he won't fight for his teammates. You see this with players all the time. They know they've committed a foul, but they will argue it, right? Head coaches are even worse than that. If you go to an NBA game, you'll see him arguing everything, even the blatant stuff. He wasn't even arguing it. He was resigned to the fact that it was a foul. Are you kidding me? And that wasn't even the only call that was butchered. On a slightly earlier play, George was fouled when he was going up for a three. And they called it, but not in the act of shooting. So instead of him shooting 3 foul shots, they just did a sidelines out of bounds. And just so we're clear, I hate both calls. I hate the fact that the offensive player can lean in on both situations and usually get the offensive foul. But the defensive foul and who end up in the foul to the foul line. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I know I'm not here. But correct me if I am wrong. But isn't this a pet move of Kevin Love and also James Harden? Isn't this the same move that they always call throughout the season? And then with 20 seconds to go in a team season, they swallow their whistle. This is absolute bullshit. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But no worries. Don't worry. We'll get a statement tomorrow saying that they screwed it up. Problem fixed. What a disgrace. And once again, if you think that I'm a Thunder fan, I am not. But here's why I'm pissed off. As a basketball fan, if George goes to the line, we see how he handles the pressure. He has to make 3 foul shots in Utah. That is not guaranteed. Absolutely not. Think back to Karl Malone, 97 finals. He was an 80% foul shooter then. The score's tied. He goes to the foul line in the last 20 seconds. It might have even been less. He misses them both. Jordan, they call a timeout. Jordan sticks a jumper on Byron Russell at the buzzer. No guarantees that Paul George makes all 3. But if he does, Utah still has a chance to win. And the way that Mitchell was playing, who rules out that he hits a game winner? What a special moment that would have been. It would have been like Damian Lillard against the Houston Rockets. It would have been very, very reminiscent of that in the playoffs, the 2014 playoffs. I think it was 2014. Anyway. But if he doesn't make it, or if Utah doesn't capitalize on their last possession, we go to overtime. Maybe we get a game 7. Regardless, the players, we want to see the players determine the outcome. Not 3 referees who apparently aren't capable of officiating a rec league or a pickup game. And the most effed up part of all of this is Billy Donovan might get fired. Paul George may leave. Westbrook's legacy might be crushed. The same with Paul George's. His legacy may be crushed. The same way Kevin Durant's, everybody lit up Kevin Durant for his Game 6 performance against the Warriors. And then, of course, he threw fuel on the fire of that when he went and joined the Warriors. But that was a terrible shooting performance. He could have redeemed himself. So you have a former MVP, an all-star who's a borderline superstar, and a head coach all feeling or having to be accountable. And for what? A group of officials who, for whatever reason, can't do their freaking job. The name of the podcast is, it's I Still Love This Game. But there are games and situations that really, really test my limits. And believe me, I did not watch today's games with the intention of bitching out the officials, but do your job. do your job. And the NBA, I hold even more accountable for this, because this is a problem that has plagued the league for so long. And they have done nothing about it. All they have done is given us some crappy 2-minute report the next day. And what good does that do? What good does that really do to the Oklahoma City Thunder fans, or their franchise, or their players, or their coach? What good does that do Billy Donovan if he's fired for being bounced in the first round with this team? Oh, we messed up the call. You have to live with it. You have to live with the repercussions of it, not us. But we admitted we screwed up. Let's just move on, and let's take a close look at Game 6 of the Cavs and Pacers, and a hot start by the Cavs with Korver and Smith raining in threes. LeBron did cop a hard foul when he went baseline, and that, by current standards at least, should have been a flagrant foul, or they should have at least looked at it. So this is a problem spilling over from Game 5, where they just didn't look at things. Why not just at least have a look at it? And I personally think there was a lot of damage or malicious intent to it. But look at it. If you look at it, then you can decide. That's what the replay is there for. Anyway, back to the game. Darren Collison's defense in the backcourt really took the Cavs out of their rhythm. And more importantly, Oladipo started to get into his groove offensively. Rodney Hood provided a nice contribution and helped the Cavs stay within striking distance. But Indiana was successful in slowing down the game and creating a 7-point lead. Lance Stevenson was big during this stretch, controlling the game with poise and scoring. Oladipo played about as good as you could hope in the first half, and Indiana capitalized. But he has not been consistent all series long, so moving on to Game 7, that's a question that have to be asked towards the Pacers. Can they win with him struggling? And of course the answer is yes, because they did win Game 3 with him struggling, but Game 7 is a totally different beast. The Cavs were able to trim the lead down to 5, but Indiana steadied themselves to go into halftime. Foul shooting remained an issue for the Pacers, but beyond that, you have to be happy if you're the Indiana Pacers with that first half. In the second half, the Pacers picked up right where they left off with intense ball pressure. Fatigue is something that has plagued LeBron throughout his career, and the increased ball pressure with him playing point guard, plus scoring, plus Indiana crashing the glass with who he is guarding, you've got to ask, how much does he have left in the tank? Cleveland started the game on fire from 3, but to begin the third quarter, they were horrific from deep, and the Pacers exploded for a 20-point lead. As bad as the third was, the fourth is even worse as a lead ballooned out to 30. Cleveland threw in the towel early, and we've got a Game 7 to look forward to. Cleveland has to be concerned heading into this game. Of course, it's an elimination game, even though you're at home. That in of itself, you've got to be worried about if you're Cleveland. Then when you take into account other factors, such as the status of Kevin Love, who was elbowed in the face in the third quarter and didn't return. Was that a concussion? If so, will he be available? In addition to that, they're dealing with a Pacers team who rediscovered form for their best player, Oladipo of course, and found a critical flaw to LeBron playing point. If Cleveland does win, expect Toronto and whoever else they play to pressure the bejesus out of the ball when he's dribbling up the court, and also crash the glass with whoever LeBron is guarding. Sometimes it's better to lose by a lot than a small margin, so don't look too much into the blowout and the final score, but instead take a look at what Indiana did in the second and third quarters and ask yourself, can Cleveland counter that? LeBron will have to at the very least, duplicate what he did in Game 5. And that's a lot to ask for, even at home. And if they go down, if the Cavs go down and LeBron goes down with them, the fallout would be massive in terms of the legacy for LeBron James. The reason I say that is one of the big boxes that you tick for the LeBron James, Michael Jordan argument is LeBron's never lost in the first round. You throw that out the window. On top of that, the reason I never placed too much into that point was Jordan was never the favorite in the first round and lost. He went up against some great Celtics teams and a very capable Milwaukee Bucks team that made the conference finals a couple of years. So those were some great teams that he went up against in the first round and lost to. This Pacers team was by pretty much everybody considered the underdog heading into this series. And if you want to say, well, LeBron's had no help, I don't buy that for a second. He still has an all-star in Kevin Love. Kyle Korver has played great, at least on the offensive end. J.R. Smith has had his moments. And yeah, I'll give you that some of the Pacers have had the games of their lives, but some of the Pacers have also had nightmarish games, including Oladipo. And if we're going to look at players not producing alongside LeBron and give LeBron a pass because his players don't produce, why don't we do that with Westbrook? Why is it when Carmelo Anthony doesn't play well, or Paul George doesn't play well, or whoever else doesn't play well alongside Westbrook, we criticize Westbrook and say, oh, people can't play with him? But when players play bad alongside LeBron, we hold them accountable and we give LeBron a pass. So there's two major things that could happen to LeBron's legacy here. This is a massive game in terms of his legacy, but maybe not so much in terms of the playoffs, because the way that the Raptors played against the Wizards, who I think most people will agree the Wizards, they're not as well coached as the Pacers, but the Wizards are a much deeper team in terms of talent than what the Pacers are, and they handled the Wizards test a lot better than what the Cavaliers have handled the Pacers test. They may even fail the Pacers test. We don't know what's going to happen in Game 7. If you're asking me a prediction, I'm going to go with LeBron at home. But look, I would not be surprised in the slightest if he chokes, or not even if he chokes, if he just plays a decent game, a very good game, but not an historically great game like we saw in Game 5, and they go down. And the final game we're going to look at is Game 6 between the Raptors and Wizards. Washington came out with the energy and emotion expected from a team facing elimination and built a lead on the back of transition points and great defense on DeRozan. Toronto showed great poise and didn't panic and began to grind away. Doris Burke nailed it in the pregame when she said that teams with championship aspirations, they win big playoff games on the road. A game of attrition developed in the second half, and Toronto began to wear down the Wizards, and as the Raptors took the lead. A nice response by the Wizards as they composed themselves to go into the fourth with a 5-point lead. All series, I've spoken about how this is a true test for the Raptors. On the road, down in the fourth, in a closeout situation against a rival and an all-star, but really two all-stars in Beal and Wall were both rolling. This is what separates contenders from pretenders. Toronto responded to the challenge and outscored the Wizards by 10 to establish a 5-point lead midway through the fourth. Outside of Wall and Beal, the Wizards struggled to get any consistent production. Following a 3 by Beal in transition that cut it to 4, the Raptors responded with an incredible hustle play from Kyle Lowry when he dove for a loose ball and passed it from his back that led to a 3-point play. Kyle Lowry was massive from the get-go. When Washington came out strong, it was him and not DeRozan that led them back. And down that stretch, Lowry went for the kill, and there was no hesitation. He led his team and the Raptors followed. The game was over when we saw a reversal of energy from the start of the game, and Toronto was now getting every offensive rebound and every loose ball. Coming into this series, everyone was concerned about the playoff Raptors, which is really the complete opposite of, say, the playoff Rondo. And they delivered big time. I said this game was a true test, but the whole series was really. Now, you might be thinking, wait, hold on a second. We've seen the Raptors. We saw them last year beat the Bucks in 6 games. And the Bucks were a 7 seed, a 6 seed, and the Wizards are an 8 seed. So what's the difference? It's all about competition. And there's no comparison between a very green, and I'm not talking about their jersey color, by the way, a very green Bucks team and the Wizards. Washington is loaded with talent, and not just talent, but veteran talent. Washington, if we're being honest, could have knocked off any Eastern Conference team in the first round. Toronto, whilst I hope they're not satisfied, should feel confident in taking them out and completing it on the road in difficult circumstances. And look, I know I was probably sounding a bit down after I don't even know what to say. We will have a podcast tomorrow because we got a Game 7 and hopefully that's better. But I mean, it just, as a basketball fan, you hate seeing that. You hate, and of course I'm referring to the Jazz and the Thunder situation, but it needs to be fixed. It absolutely needs to be fixed. And I've put a lot of time and a lot of effort into really promoting basketball and talking about basketball, but I'm not going to pretend that there's not a problem here. This is a huge problem. This is as obvious. Look, if it wasn't so well, I'm not talking about the goaltend or anything like that, because that's split second. And certain angles you can't see it. But everybody watching that saw that. And I don't believe for a second that they didn't see that. They just swallowed their whistle. All three of them swallowed their whistles. I don't know why. It's unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, guys. Episode 53 will be coming out tomorrow. I do not know what time it will be coming out, however, because I'll be driving for much of the morning, and I'll be watching the games, and I'm going to be on the road a little bit, so I'll try and get it out as soon as possible. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting. Send through your questions, because as I've said earlier, once the first round really winds down, we usually don't get a whole lot of days where there's 3 or 4 games on in a day. So when there's 2 or sometimes 1 games or sometimes no games, if you send me through a lot of questions, I'll be able to handle those questions, and we'll still be able to get 20, 25, 30 minutes of content out there as opposed to 10 or 15 minutes. But anyway, I appreciate you guys listening. I'm sorry I'm a bit flat, but I'm just disappointed and I'm frustrated. And I did my absolute best to not curse during this episode. But on the bright side, we do get 2 Game 7s. They're both in the Eastern Conference. We will have a Jazz and Rockets preview coming up shortly as well. We'll probably throw that in tomorrow as well. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.